Hi guys, it's Jen from Megavan, and today we're gonna talk about King Théoden. I'm making a video on King Théoden for several reasons, but mainly it's because Théoden is one of my favorite Tolkien characters. He's right up there with Sam and Faramir, and in today's video, I wanna tell you why.
So, it is before the walls of Minas Tirith. The doom of our time will be decided.
When we first meet Théoden in the Two Towers, he's being manipulated by his chief advisor Grima Wormtongue, who was secretly working for Saruman. Grima had his fingers wrapped around King Théoden to the extent that Théoden was unwilling to defend Rohan from the Dunlendings and the Uruk-hai who were going about the land and pillaging the Westfold. The Westfold is the region of Rohan where we find Helm's Deep and other villages. In Jackson's Two Towers, Théoden is 100% possessed by Saruman. He's extremely aged, he has gray hair, glossy eyes, and he's unwilling to defend Rohan from Saruman's armies. This is a stretch from what happens in the book. In the book, Grima is still running the show, and it's hinted upon that Grima may have poisoned Théoden, but Théoden is not described to appear old or pathetic, and he's certainly not possessed. That being said, there is merit to Jackson's introduction to Théoden. In the film adaptation, when Gandalf releases Théoden from the spell, Théoden is instantly restored to his true age, and the facial transition is done brilliantly. It appears right before our eyes in one beautifully edited montage of shots of the actor repeating the same head movements with less and less makeup until he's young and fresh again. I don't even think they used much visual effects to put that sequence together, and if they did not use a lot. Another reason why I love the possession version of the introduction of Théoden is that having Saruman actually possess King Théoden shows that Saruman is super powerful, and that reminds us that our heroes are up against a super powerful enemy, but that Gandalf the White is more powerful. If you remember in the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf was grey, the two wizards fought and Saruman, who was stronger back then, won that showdown. Now, one movie later, when Gandalf uses his power to throw Saruman across the room, we kind of get a conclusion to this fight, and it is indeed Gandalf who is now the more powerful wizard because he wins. Another element that's great about this scene is that it starts to shape Aragorn's path towards his rightful place as king. Unlike in the book, Jackson chose to portray a more insecure version of Aragorn, an Aragorn who seriously doubts his ability to be a good king. In this scene though, we get to see Aragorn witness for the first time the effect it has on people to have their rightful king return, and that it's not all bad being a king. Throughout the Two Towers and in The Return of the King, Théoden serves as a kind of mentor for Aragorn on how to be a good king and leader.
Good knuckles for 8! And Rohan will answer. Muster the Rohirrim!
Another reason why I love this scene is that it tells an interesting story about learning to trust others after being manipulated. A few days after being released from Saruman's spell, Aragorn announces that 10,000 Uruk-hai are on their way to Rohan, and Gandalf correctly points out that Rohan needs to fight. Théoden doesn't think that is the best idea, probably because when he was possessed, he exiled most of his young and loyal warriors, and since he was not very nice to them, he wrongly assumed that they would not come back to serve him. What he decides to do instead is to go to Helm's Deep because the ancient fortress was well fortified and had protected his people in the past. What's interesting about this sequence is that shot when Théoden notices Gandalf gently place his hand on his hand when he advises him to stay and fight, just as Wormtongue had done. It is just after that shot that Théoden decides not to take on Saruman directly, but to retreat to Helm's Deep.
By order of the king, the city must empty. We make for the refuge of Helm's Deep.
I like this little disagreement between the two authority figures because for the last 4 hours, Gandalf had proven to be the voice of reason, and we, the audience, trust and respect his advice. No question about it. Like if Gandalf says jump, we all say how high. So it's interesting to have this new character challenge Gandalf and to see Gandalf not being able to do a damn thing about it. Why? Because although Gandalf is a Maya wizard, Théoden is a king, and what the king says goes.
When last I looked, Théoden, not Aragorn, was king of Rohan.
Then what is the king's decision?
Again, this is another lesson for future King Aragorn, and if you watch the sequence in the film, right after Théoden disses Gandalf, and the next sequence is a shot of a pissed off Gandalf talking shit about Théoden, and Aragorn stepping up to defend Théoden's decision.
Helm's Deep. They flee to the mountains when they should stand and fight. Who will defend them if not the king?
He's only doing what he thinks is best for his people. Helm's Deep has saved them in the past.
Well, Gandalf doesn't really talk shit about Théoden, he was just blowing off some steam, but Aragorn stood up for the king, which kind of shows that he's slowly starting to lean into the whole being king business. Théoden's decision to ignore Gandalf's advice was a very conservative move, of course, and it comes across as a moment of weakness, but at the same time, it shows that Théoden wants to show that he is his own man. He knows the job, he's been doing it for a long time, and just like he says in the film, he knows how to defend his own keep.
I have fought many wars, Master Wolf. I know how to defend my own keep.
So, as you all know, the only way our heroes would ever be able to defend Sauron is if a strong, organized, and inspirational leader took charge of armies of good men to continue to contribute to the destruction of Sauron and the Ring, while Frodo and Sam simultaneously go up to Mount Doom to throw the ring in the pit. Théoden is all that and more. Théoden was in his early 70s when we meet him in the context of the War of the Ring. He had been ruling Rohan for almost 40 years at that point. So with all of those decades of experience as a king, and with much of that time spent in Rohan, Théoden was well equipped to lead the people of his realm into victory. Over the years, Théoden acquired military experience as well as a sense of how to make military strategy. Over and over again in the film, we see that he knows how to plan and strategize for a battle. Both in the Two Towers and in The Return of the King, we see him carefully planning and executing well thought of battle plans. He didn't just opt for Helm's Deep in the Two Towers because he was scared. Like I said before, he strategically led the people of Edoras to Hornburg at Helm's Deep to take refuge from Saruman's army of Uruk-hai, who were well on their way to the realms of Rohan to kill everybody. Hornburg was built during the Second Age of Middle-earth by men of Gondor and was very well fortified. So this migration was a good tactical decision, and we see that although there weren't many men, he did the best he could with the men he had at his disposal. It also helped that in Jackson's adaptation, Jackson took the creative liberty and threw Haldir and some of the elves into the action, but I'm actually all for that. You can actually check out my video on Haldir if you want to know more about why I'm a fan of this artistic decision. It's true that in the film, it is Aragorn and Haldir who act as commanders, and we don't see him fight as much as the Théoden character does in the book, but he does do a good share of fighting, especially at dawn when he and Aragorn lead the charge. But it is one movie later that we truly see Théoden in action. In The Return of the King, he oversees the coordination of 10,000 men from all across Rohan, and he leads them all the way to Minas Tirith in Gondor. From there, he is the head of 2 incredible stampede charges in Pelennor Field, which brings me to another amazing quality about King Théoden. On top of being an amazing military strategist, he's also very inspirational, and he's inspirational in 2 ways. The first way he's inspirational is that he has the most amazing rallying cries. We get this on 2 occasions. The first time is in the Two Towers when he and Aragorn get ready at dawn to charge the attacking Uruk-hai at Helm's Deep.
Fell deeds awake.
Now for wrath, now for ruin, and the red gold.
The second time we see him do this is it's a very powerful moment, or even the greatest speech in the entire trilogy. This speech takes place at the start of the Battle of Pelennor Fields when he fires up his troops of 6,000 Rohirrim before charging directly into tens of thousands of orcs. The entire speech, especially the lines where he says, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises, as well as the conclusion of his speech when he yells, death, still brings chills down my spine, and I love it. It's so brilliant.
Spears shall be shaken, shields shall be splintered. A sword day, a red day, and the sun rises.
Although Aragorn was not there to witness the speech, I think that somebody from the Rohirrim briefed him on that great speech, because later in the Battle of the Black Gate, he spits out an equally amazing rallying cry, and I love this because it further supports the idea that Théoden was a fantastic mentor to Aragorn in their short time together.
By all that you hold dear, this good earth, I bid you stand! Land of the West!
Now, this little theory of mine isn't written anywhere, but it's not so much of a stretch to assume that Aragorn's for Frodo's speech was inspired by Théoden. This is just my theory. The second way that Théoden is inspirational is that he's a solid family man, and he has the goods to back it up. The first evidence that supports this is the fact that he adopted Éomer and Éowyn. We learn in Tolkien's Appendix A, entitled The House of Orel, that Théoden had a sister named Théoden, and that he loved her very much. Théoden was married to Éomond, and together they had a son and a daughter, Éomer and Éowyn. Unfortunately, Éomond was slain in battle, and not long after that, Théoden died of illness, and Théoden, being the good guy that he is, adopted his niece and nephew and raised them as his own children, together with his son Theodred. Unfortunately, his son Theodred died during the time when Théoden was under Saruman's spell. The death of Theodred resulted in his cousin Éomer becoming heir to the throne of Rohan. Now, we only see Theodred a few times in the film, and only for a few seconds each time, and very little is known about him. But what we do know is that he loved Éomer like a brother, and loved no one more than Éomer except for his father, Théoden. I think the fact that Theodred loved his father so much is a testament to how great of a father Théoden is. Furthermore, while his son Theodred met his end early in the Two Towers, another thing that kind of further validates Théoden's amazing parenting and leadership skills is the fact that his niece and nephew grow up to become influential in Rohan, across Middle-earth really. Éomer became one of the most prominent commanders in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and Éowyn almost single-handedly slayed the Witch King of Angmar. I think their success that they achieved later in life was thanks to the good example, the good mentorship provided to them by their uncle, which further supports and validates the fact that Théoden is Dad and Uncle of the Year.
You shall live to see these days renewed. No more despair.
While we're on the topic of fatherhood, I want to say a few lines about the death of his son, because Théoden's character gives some interesting insight on how a person might behave after losing a child. Now, I can't begin to imagine how it's like to lose a child, but what I'm pretty sure of is that this kind of tragedy can either break a person's spirit for a short or a long period of time. What it can also do, though, is that it can push someone to decide what to do with the time that is given to them, just like Gandalf says in the Fellowship of the Ring. I think grief varies from one person to another, and the person has the right to mourn as they see fit. A good example of this is the contrast between Denethor and Théoden. In The Lord of the Rings, both Théoden and Denethor, they lose a son to the war. In both cases, both fathers have a good heir to keep things up and running at home. Théoden had his nephew Éomer, and Denethor had his son Faramir. And although their circumstances were similar, Théoden and Denethor acted in very different ways. Théoden put his trust to his nephew Eomer, while Denethor lost his shit and almost burnt his son and the place to the ground.
Théoden King stands alone. Not alone.
Rohan!
Bernard Hill, who is the actor who plays Théoden, gives a genuine portrayal of a man weeping over the loss of his son. Like, we can tell that it's brutal, but it's not the kind of exaggerated in-your-face display of grief. We don't see him screaming at the heavens, he doesn't start kicking at the dirt, he doesn't storm off, and his tears are just very silent. The weight of his son's death sits heavily on Théoden, and we see it from time to time in the movie. For example, we can perhaps argue that his grief explains why he was so protective of his niece Eowyn. I also think that the grief comes out in the sequence when he's arguing with Aragorn at Helm's Deep. This is the scene when Aragorn tells Théoden to call for aid from Gondor. In that sequence, Théoden lets out his frustration on Gondor because Gondor had been MIA when lots of terrible things were going on in Rohan. But then, just when he's about to tear Aragorn a new asshole, an interesting thing happens. Eomer had no problem naming concrete military examples of when Gondor didn't show, but then he suddenly stops. He can't finish his sentence. He just says, where was gone, and pauses.
Gondor. Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? Where was Gondor when our enemies closed in around us? Where was Gondor? No, my lord Aragorn. We are alone.
I'm just sharing my opinion here, and I don't believe this is written in the book, and I don't know if this is what Peter Jackson was thinking, but I think deep down, the character could have been thinking, where was Gondor when Saruman killed my son? Where was I when Saruman killed my son? I think the weight of his son's death sits heavily on Théoden, and as a result of that, Théoden really throws himself into the action to the point that he's willing to die for Rohan, and this makes both his speech at Pelennor Field and his death later on even more impactful. Beyond his inspiring ability to cope with loss, let's not forget that Théoden is a noble man. Like, he comes from a noble family. Théoden grew up in the royal family, the House of Orls, and in Unfinished Tales, Tolkien describes him as a vigorous and a martial spirit and a great horseman. Théoden was a good king at a time when shit was going down super hard, and for that, he is undoubtedly one of the most influential figures of the Third Age, even if his greatest deeds were accomplished only in the last few weeks of his life. Without his courage, his compelling leadership, Rohan, Gondor in the West would surely have fallen into shadow. Like, he led the freaking Rohirrim after all, and the Rohirrim is the coolest pack of men in all of literary history. Like, I'm sorry, Homer, but Achilles and his buddies have nothing on the Rohirrim. Like, no question about it.
Master the Rohirrim.
Théoden's career is brief, but it's brilliant. One that, at the end, it proves to be nothing short of glorious. I still have a lot to say, and I'll probably be making a follow-up video, but I kind of want to read some more of Tolkien's letters first because I don't want to make any mistakes in the record. So I'll just end things by making a point that Théoden has some of the greatest lines in the trilogy. Bernard Hill's performance as Théoden was fantastic.
No parent should have to bury their child.
So it begins. How did it come to this?
Bernard Hill commands a lot of respect when he's performing, and because of that, even the most subtle lines are epic. There are a lot of amazing performances in the trilogy, but Bernard Hill is at the top of that list. And in case any of the shots that I just played don't bring my point home, just remember that he's the only actor in cinematic history to appear in 2 of the 3 films who won 11 Academy Awards. Remember that Bernard Hill, he's the one who played the captain on the Titanic, and the captain dutifully goes down with his ship instead of skidding on a lifeboat. Bernard Hill has a reputation of being cast as honorable characters for the simple reason that he has the skills to bring it home. that's it for today. And I think I'll make a follow-up video on this to give a more in-depth analysis of the Théoden that we get in the books. But before I jump into that, I want to finish going through some of the passages again, because I want to kind of develop some of my thoughts so I don't get roasted in the comments below. So let me know your thoughts on this video, and feel free to share any elements that you would like me to explore in a future video about this character. And also, as ever, if you wish, like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really does help. Farewell.